On the heels of yet another mass shooting that killed 4 people yesterday at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Uvalde Elementary massacre last week, and the Buffalo supermarket murders before that, and the 30-plus mass shootings that happened in between, and that is the real number. The March for Our Lives movement is once again gearing up to call for change, just as they first did more than 4 years ago, led by the survivors of the Parkland, Florida school shooting. Among them, David Hogg, who explained to me just a few months ago why he and others keep fighting for change in spite of all the resistance they've faced.
Optimism isn't a choice when kids are dying. We have to continue working no matter what we think the future holds. The reality is it's going to take generations of people doing this if we're just focused at the state level and we don't address the fact that the filibuster is effectively killing our children because we are not able to enact common sense gun laws.
And that call for common sense gun laws at the national level will echo across the country once again with another March for Our Lives demonstration next Saturday, June 11th, in Washington, D.C., and more than 300 other sister events in other cities, including right here in Boston. Joining me are two of the leaders behind these events, Parkland shooting survivor and March for Our Lives co-founder Jacqueline Corin, who's a rising senior now at Harvard, and Boston March organizer Charlotte Vincent, a recent graduate of Brookline High. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
And I should just say quickly, for those who like to think this kind of thing doesn't happen here, just before we started taping this segment, we learned of a 16-year-old who was arrested after bringing a loaded gun to a charter school in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Jacqueline, more and more responsible journalists are ensuring that we learn about the lives of people who were killed in these atrocities, but we don't know much about survivors. You are one. 4 years after Parkland and after Uvalde, how are you?
Wow, I mean, that is a loaded question. The reality is that if you're a part of a community that goes through a mass shooting, you are never fully healed. You know, the shooting at my high school that killed 17 people happened almost 4.5 years ago, and I am still absolutely traumatized. I mean, I can't go anywhere without fearing that someone is carrying a gun behind me. And that's what a lot of survivors live like every single day. And because there's been over 200 mass shootings just this year so far, and we're barely halfway through the year, you can only imagine that there are a lot of survivors of gun violence that go through the same thing every single day, day in and day out. And it's not just in schools. As we've seen, it's in our hospitals, it's in movie theaters, it's in our churches, it's in our synagogues, it's everywhere in this country. No one is safe.
You know, Jacqueline, it seems to me from afar that someone like you faces two choices after living through a trauma like that. You can choose to fight, which means you have to relive this over and over and over again, or turn away from it. Why did you choose the former?
Yeah, well, I mean, partly it was survivor's guilt that lives with me every day, knowing that I was lucky enough to be alive. I needed to do something productive with my fear on behalf of my friends that were killed. And then another half of it was, I stood up immediately after the shooting at my school because I had been aware of the influences of the National Rifle Association in our politics. But as I, progressed through the gun safety movement, I learned more and more about the barriers that exist in our politics that prevent common sense gun legislation from passing in this country. And, that just made me even more angry. And everyone asks, what do you feel when these shootings happen all the time? And often my first emotion is anger because I know what needs to be done. There are preventable common sense legislation that can be passed and have been passed on a state level. I mean, Massachusetts is, one of the states with the strongest gun laws in the country and consequently has the second lowest gun death rate in the US. So there's a correlation there. So it's just infuriating.
Charlotte, what's your motivation? And are you an outlier amongst your contemporaries, or you the norm, do you think?
Yeah, I think I became involved with the movement back in 2018. I actually helped lead the walkout at my school following Parkland. And we had thousands of students walk out that day. And that was really the first time I realized that this is a movement. And there are so many of my peers that are behind me. And even for this next march on June 11th, I've had so many people reaching out to me saying, we are behind you. And I think that we are here to show that we are the generation that can end gun violence.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, you go ahead, Charlotte. My apologies.
No, I just think that it's really powerful to see, but it also is, it's a movement that grows every day. And there are obstacles that we face every day, especially as we wait, more lives are lost each day. And I think that can definitely it gets hard, but we keep going.
Well, Charlotte, explain June 11th to me. Is it because we have to do something, or because you believe and others believe that this time might be different? There is reason for hope. What's behind it?
Yeah, so we really firmly believe that this time is different. June 11th, across the country, we already have over 400 marches planned, and we are here to demand that Senator Schumer calls a vote on universal background checks at this moment in time, to get lawmakers on the record for something that over 90% of Americans support. And we are here to show that we are going to end gun violence, and we are coming out in record numbers once again. We made a lot of change after 2018, but like David Hogg mentioned in that segment you showed earlier, the movement continues. It's going to take a lot of work to get that done.
Jacqueline, as callous and uncaring as the obstacles to change in Congress are, you were sort of living proof that there's no obstacle too high. When you led the legislative effort after the murders at your school, A-plus NRA guy, now United States Senator, then Governor, Rick Scott is running the state. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while, 3-day waiting period, raising the purchase age to 21, and banning bump stocks. Am I not right about that?
You are absolutely right about that. After I brought 100 of my peers to the Florida state capitol of Tallahassee, 6 days after the shooting at my high school, we did pass all of those laws, and including extreme risk protection orders, which basically, allows law enforcement to temporarily remove a firearm from someone who exhibits signs of wanting to hurt themselves or others, because a lot of what gun violence is, as well as preventing gun suicide. And so all of those pieces of legislation have been proven to save lives in Florida. And I'll kind of answer the question you pointed at Charlotte as well.
Sure.
After the march in 2018, we saw record-breaking numbers of gun safety laws passed in a lot of states, not only just Florida. I mean, we saw Florida legislation. We also saw extreme risk protection orders in Virginia, or the prohibition of firearms at polling sites in Colorado. And all of those, all of our hard work also led to at least 32 NRA-backed candidates losing their races in 2018. So though people feel frustrated that nothing has been done on a national level, besides for banning bump stocks, and surprisingly, Trump did that, stuff is happening on the state level. And that's why we're marching again, because we're trying to push for that movement on the state level to, happen on a national level. Because ultimately, gun trafficking. Sorry.
But I understand that, Jacqueline. And I know the target is Washington this time, and Hogg said that as well. But I would argue part of the problem that we haven't discussed is, at least in my opinion, the most influential man in Washington, and that's Mitch McConnell. And here he is Tuesday speaking to a reporter.
We have a group led by Senator Cornyn and Senator Murphy on the Democratic side, discussing how we might be able to come together to target the problem, which is mental illness and school safety.
Jacqueline, notice a word missing from what the problem is with Mitch McConnell there?
No mention of guns.
No mention of guns.
It is, I know Mitch McConnell knows better. But the reality is that he gets his pockets stuffed with money from the National Rifle Association, because it's not just a matter of school safety. we saw yesterday that it happened in a hospital. This happens everywhere in this country. We cannot focus on school safety. Arming teachers is a ridiculous sentiment. We need to make sure that our students, or our kids rather, are safe when they're in school, yes, but also school's out. It's June. Kids are going to be walking the streets, going to church. How do we protect them then, Mitch?
Jacqueline, you mentioned the absurdity of arming teachers. One of the demented, phony arguments we've heard from the opponents forever, and you can practically repeat it word for word, I'm sure, is the antidote to the bad guy with a gun or good guys with a gun. I'm wondering what they're saying after the cops waiting outside in Uvalde, or the courageous former cop turned security person at the Top supermarket in Buffalo who was armed and did shoot at the killer. That argument is gone. The notion that laws don't matter when the shooter in Uvalde waited until he was 18 years old, which is what the law requires, to buy the damn assault weapon, even though the arguments have been totally undercut. That doesn't move people, does it, Jacqueline?
The good guy with a gun argument is absolutely absurd. It also happened in my school. There was an armed school resource officer that was too scared to enter the building while a 19-year-old killed 17 people. And so, it's just an excuse. It is pure selfishness in politics. And that's why Americans need to show up to the polls this November in the midterms and elect officials that will actually care about children dying. And that's what the reality in this country.
I want to get your reactions, each of you, if I can, to a couple other, I don't know what to call them, strategic suggestions that have been made by people who are on your side. Charlotte, starting with you, here's Jay Johnson, former Homeland Security head for Barack Obama, on MSNBC. Here's what he had to say.
Why should a child who was an eyewitness to what happened in Uvalde, for example, go to grief counseling for the rest of her life because of what she saw, but the rest of us are spared?
And what he went on to say is we need an Emmett Till moment, and I guess he should have said a Mamie Till moment. Mamie Till Bradley, his mother, and I'm sure most viewers know, 14-year-old black boy in Mississippi in 1955, allegedly said something, offended a white woman, abducted, tortured, lynched, mutilated, and his mother decided to have an open casket so that people could see what happened to him. A lot of people, and I have to say myself included, Charlotte, believe that it's an abstract notion when we hear about little kids getting murdered, but it's time for an Emmett Till moment. Do you think it is?
I think it is to an extent. I think we have to protect the respect of the families who are grieving.
Of course, they would decide.
Yes.
Of course, yes.
Yes, of course. But I do think, I noticed after Uvalde, I saw a lot of tweets and a lot of, public figures calling for this. And I think the idea that a parent can drop their child off at school and can only identify them from a DNA test is just something that is so tragic, but so abstract for those who do not have to go through it. And so I do think it's time for the American people and the politicians who refuse to act on this issue to have an awakening to what these families are going through.
And another tactic that I don't mean tactic in a cheap sort of way, Jacqueline, that I read about yesterday in The Atlantic in a piece written by Gal Beckerman, was spend the summer, all you parents out there with kids in schools, organize, get ready, and if Congress hasn't acted to do the right thing on gun safety by the fall, keep your kids out of school. What do you think of that?
I honestly don't think it's a bad idea. I can totally understand why parents are petrified to send their children to school. And if that's what finally makes them move, then so be it. Boycotts have been incredibly effective in this country. And I don't think we've ever seen something to that degree, a boycott on our education system. But children are being killed in the place that they're supposed to feel the safest, where they're supposed to grow as humans. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
Before you two leave, I'd like to get a quick response from both of you, starting with you, Charlotte. What do you say to a person who's watching, who's considering participating in March for Our Lives on June 11th, but is skeptical that the obstructionists are ever going to care more about kids than they care about gun manufacturers. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I say to them, first of all, please join us. We need this movement to be as large as possible to make an impact. And I would say that we saw the progress, like Jacqueline was mentioning, after 2018. There were so many laws on the state level that were passed, and youth voter turnout went up exponentially following the March for Our Lives in 2018. So we are back. Our generation is getting older. We are going to the polls this November. And I would say to everyone watching, please come with us and be part of a movement, because you're going to see it in November, and also as states make action that we will force them to.
Jacqueline, you want to add anything to that?
Just if you want to march, text march to 954-954 and find your local march, or join us in Washington, D.C. for the main march.
Jacqueline and Charlotte, I thank you for your work, and I wish you a lot of luck on June 11th and thereafter. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.